Now let's get more on Donald Trump being elected the President of the United States. How could this affect you and indeed the rest of the world? Well, you've been sending us your questions using the hashtag BBC Ask This. Thank you very much for sending those in. And let's discuss those questions now. Joining me are Marco Vicenzino, Director of the Global Strategy Project. It's a geopolitical risk and international business advisory firm. And also by Sir Nigel Sheinwald, a former British ambassador to Washington. And a very good morning to both of you. Let's get straight into these questions. We have been receiving a lot of them, I have to tell you. This from Lee, who asks, will Trump's policy on terrorism lead to more Islamophobia in America and by far the rest of the world? Marco, if you'd like to start off on that one.
A lot of the rhetoric that was used during the campaign was very provocative, divisive rhetoric. When he had his acceptance speech, when he won, when it was clear that he won, he already started a process of rhetoric of reconciliation. You cannot erase what was said during the campaign overnight, but the process of reconciliation has to begin, and he has to reach out, not just in rhetoric, but also in action. And in that sense, is that it's a new beginning, and as president, he has to change his rhetoric, and he has to engage more in outreach. And in terms of, say, is America its position in the world? That's also, it'll negatively impact America diplomatically and its credibility around the world if he doesn't change tact in terms of his rhetoric.
Okay, and so Nigel, your thoughts on that? Certainly that victory speech yesterday struck a more conciliatory tone than we've heard from Donald Trump in the past. But in terms of reaching out specifically to the Muslim community, has he got a lot of work to do?
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of work to do. But as Marco was saying, one of the big unknowns is how Trump transforms himself, and whether he transforms himself from being a candidate to being a president. And he's got a couple of months to think about that before he's inaugurated. I think that there will be a change. There was already some backtracking on the campaign trail from some of his most aggressive comments about Muslims. And I just don't know how his policy on the Middle East and on terrorism will in the end pan out. It will depend a lot on the sort of advisors, the sort of cabinet members that he chooses, and what his relationship is with them. Is he going to listen? Is he going to take their views into account? Is he going to listen to his professional advisors in the American Armed Services and so on? If he does, I think as Marco was saying, then I think that there's a chance of him being able to do that outreach. But I think we frankly just don't know at the moment quite how that's going to work.
There are, as you say, a lot of unknowns at this point. Jamal asks Marco, I'm a British Muslim. Will I still be allowed to go on holiday to the USA? Yes,
you're a British citizen. See, what happened was during the campaign, in the early part of the campaign, he spoke about that ban on all Muslims, and then he rectified it over the months, and basically the position was people from countries that are high on the terrorism list, from high-risk countries. Now, many of these countries happen to be Muslim-majority countries, but the UK is not so. And as a British citizen, I don't see any problem with him going to the United States. Okay,
one for you, Sir Nigel. An anonymous one asks, will the US and the UK continue on with their special relationship? That's a relationship we've heard about so much over the years. Or will we take a step back from the US?
Well, the special relationship isn't something which was sort of set in aspic. It's changed over the years. Since Churchill first invented the term, it's obviously become less important in world affairs, and probably less important to the two countries. But it remains very important for the UK, for our security and our foreign policy. And in a post-Brexit world, it's probably going to get even more important. And I'd expect the UK government to make an effort to engage with the Trump administration once it's properly formed. But I think they'll have to take a view as to how the things that we were just talking about pan out once he's got his policies in place. And undoubtedly, until it's clear what his real policies are in relation to NATO, in relation to the Middle East, in relation to terrorism, in relation to climate change, whether he keeps the Iran deal, there are a whole host of things where he's made commitments on the campaign trail, which we need to see how he's going to handle those issues when he's actually in government. So I think until that's clear, you won't see the full tenor, the full atmosphere of the UK-US relationship. It remains an asset in the world that we're in. The defence, intelligence, foreign policy, trade, All the other ties are there to be used. They're very important in the dangerous world we're in. But I think it just depends on whether there's a convergence of real policy and interest as Trump gets his feet under the table.
And will, of course, pragmatism and practicalities, shall we say, override the distaste that many politicians here have expressed about Mr. Trump's behaviour, his comments during the election campaign?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Theresa May, our Prime Minister, sent him a perfectly friendly, formal letter of congratulation yesterday. So I think that that was the right thing to do, and we'll have to see how the process of getting connected with the new American administration pans out in the next few weeks and months. But certainly there will be a reserve there until we're a bit clearer about what his policies are.
Okay, Marco, a question for you. This is from Bugsy at Azorbo, who asks, how does the Trump win affect oil prices and the war on terror all over the globe?
Well, the oil prices is something beyond Trump. They may make some short-term, speculators may make some money off shorting, certain events that may happen. But in terms of the war, this global war on terror, if one wishes to use that term, is a fact that, generally speaking, there's going to be continuity in terms of military strategy, tactics. What may change is the rhetoric, and that's an important element, is that on this conflict, this ongoing conflict, which one can even call multi-generational, the rhetoric is extremely important how used, and that could change compared to the Obama administration. For example, the use of the word Islamic terrorism, which Trump throughout the campaign was accusing the Obama administration that they refused to call it what it is, and he was constantly using the word Islamic terrorism, and there's a big political debate whether you should use it or not. Obama administration was obviously of the view that you shouldn't use that word. He's of the view that you should use that word. So that political debate will spill over into the communications element of the conflict against terrorism.
And linked to that, a question, Sir Nigel, from Adel Shawi, who asks, how will Trump's win affect the Middle East and Syria?
Well, again, it depends a bit on how his policy evolves, how he develops it. I mean, what he's promising is he said some very sharp things about terrorism, about Muslim communities around the world, but he's also said that America is not going to get entangled militarily in the Middle East or other areas. He wants to take a step back in terms of American involvement in the world. He doesn't want to be the world's policeman. He doesn't want to bear all the financial responsibility for that action internationally. So I don't think that it's right to assume that there will be an immediate increase in belligerence, in military activity, and so on. He's going to have to work out. One of his priorities is going to be ISIS. Is he going to broadly maintain what the previous administration has done, or is he going to try to ramp that up somewhat? Is he going to try and work with Putin to end the Syria conflict in ways which would be very difficult for the Syrian people, but which would support the current Syrian leadership? So I think there are a number of unclear parts to this, but it's not necessarily the case that he's going to enter office with a very aggressive agenda. And indeed, when he says putting America first, I think it's inevitable that just like Barack Obama, who came into office in 2009 in the middle of a financial crisis, we may not have that financial crisis today, but his priorities are going to be primarily domestic and to do with America when he comes into office. Of course, no American president can be averse to the world outside, can shut himself off completely. But I don't think that it's right to think that he's going to come out all guns blazing and only focusing on an international agenda. That doesn't seem right to me.
Okay, let's try and get through a few more of these questions now from Flora Jackson, Marco. To what extent is Trump able to undo and revoke the accords and agreements on climate change made in the past decade, something that he's talked about on the campaign trail, certainly?
Specifically, I think the one to look at is the climate change accords, the Paris Climate Change Accord from December 2015.
Which has just come into effect.
Specifically, to answer your question, there's a big division in Congress. In order to have a treaty passed in the U.S., you need 2/3 of approval from the U.S. Senate. The president, to avoid that, has signed what's called an executive agreement. So he signed this agreement as an executive agreement, but an executive agreement can be undone by an executive agreement by a new president. So Trump can sign a piece of paper in an executive agreement doing a previous one.
So it could be quite
Sure,
easy,
of course.
relatively easy for him to undo that.
Definitely.
A question from Jack Murphy. Sir Nigel, will NATO no longer defend the Baltic states and other parts of Eastern Europe? And then that links to a question from Mohammed, who says, given the significant role of the FBI in this election and Trump's quote-unquote friendship with Putin, will we see unprecedented FBI-KGB collaboration?
I'd be a bit surprised if the FBI does that, but I'm getting a bit of feedback on the earpiece. I don't know whether you can do something about that, but no, I don't think the FBI is going to suddenly have a reset with the KGB. I do think that one of the first things that President Trump is going to have to work out is his attitude to NATO. And I think there are two issues here. The first is he going to push the European members of NATO to do more on their defence spending? And that seems to me to be perfectly reasonable. It's what previous presidents have done. If he's got a better strategy for achieving it, it will be in the American interest. It will actually be in the British interest too, as a country which does spend more than 2% of its GDP on defence spending. But I think you need to dissociate that from some of the other remarks he's made about NATO, which have tended to denigrate NATO as an international institution and give the impression that he's indifferent to threats to NATO from outside, from Russia and elsewhere. I think that it's very important for the UK, for our NATO partners, and actually for the world stability, that he recommits to American alliances. There'll be a lot of countries around the world, like Japan, like Saudi Arabia, like Israel, as well as countries like Britain, France and Germany, traditional allies of America, who'll be looking for some recognition that alliances in this difficult but new world still count for something. So I think
Marco,
he has to recommit.
Sorry to interrupt, Sir Nigel. Marco, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, just a quick brief. Is that during the campaign trail, what the difference with Trump is that he was saying in public what many had said in private. And for a presidential candidate to say the stuff that he did, for example, he was very much questioning the very foundations underpinning U.S. foreign policy since 1945. He's open to debate. He didn't say exactly that he would change many things, but he was questioning those things, and that very questioning of itself sent shockwaves. Much of it is going to remain subject to negotiations. What he's saying is basically for countries in NATO to do more burden sharing, and this has been a part of a debate that's been going on for a long time. It's the type of rhetoric that he used that's caused the shockwaves.
Okay, gentlemen, we've got just a couple more minutes. I'm going to ask you for brief answers, if I may, on these last two questions. Tony asks, will he do the job full-time or take 2 days a week to run his businesses? Marco, I'm assuming he'll get his family on board to run the businesses for him.
Completely. He's going to have to do a lot of proper paperwork to prevent conflict of interest. I'm sure they've been working on that to shift everything to his families and to his executives, maybe put some stuff in trust, but there's going to be a clear division between his public duties and what he has and his private belongings, which will be taken care of by his family. And
just finally, from Tom Machin, Sir Nigel, what will happen with the ongoing lawsuits against Trump? He certainly comes to the role of president with quite a lot of baggage, shall we say.
Well, I don't know what will happen over the lawsuits, if there are any, arising from the women who made allegations about him during the campaign trail. And I don't know whether any of those have launched actual lawsuits. I think the priority for a lot of those people was obviously to make that known as part of the election campaign. For things like the Trump Foundation, as Marco was saying, he's going to have to separate that anyway. So it seems to me that a suit could continue against the Trump Foundation, but the president would have to be commercially and legally remote and separate from it. I mean, it would obviously affect his reputation, but I think he needs to be legally distinct. So I think this is another area of uncertainty, but it's complicated having a presidency which starts with a certain amount of baggage, as you say.
And Marco, just a quick thought from you on that.
Basically, he's got 75 court cases against him right now.
75?
Most of them will be dismissed because they're considered to be somewhat ridiculous cases, but some of them are more serious. If you look at Trump University, there's going to be a hearing coming up on December 5th, but these, once again, are corporate entities. They're not against him personally, so they're civil suits. So if he does lose, it'll be financial loss of his corporation. These are not against him personally.
Okay. Very good to talk to you both. Thank you very much for answering those questions. Sir Nigel Sheinwald, former British ambassador to Washington, and here with me in the studio, Marco Vicenzino, director of the Global Strategy Project. And thanks to you at home for your questions as well. Now, in a moment, a summary of the business news this hour. But first, the headlines on BBC Newsroom Live. And you